Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Nickalls, the product manager for CXM, and I'm going to go through an update on what we've been doing with the CXM product and some of the plans we've got going forwards. So just a bit of housekeeping. You can join in the conversation on Twitter with the hashtag Jadu Academy. We'll share the recording afterwards, and feel free to ask questions as we go along. Okay, so just to kick off, one of the new features we've released is a new API endpoint for retrieving case attachments from CXM. So investing in CXM API functionality is going to be a recurring theme in terms of the product strategy, and also something that's going to be talked about in some of the other presentations today. So we recently released this feature for you being able to retrieve case attachments from CXM via the API for a number of, based on a number of conversations with customers. So one of the use cases that we had here was being able to retrieve pictures of fly tipping that have been reported by residents. And then as part of some work that customers have been doing where they present that fly tipping on a map, to be able to then show the images of that fly tipping, so that when a resident goes to report fly tipping on the map, they can see that is the location of where fly tipping has already been reported. And we'll come on to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Another use case we have is coming from some of the customers in the States. So having users who aren't signed in as part of a workflow, receiving an email and then being directed off to a CMS page, and then seeing a list of attachments which are effectively requests that require approval. So being able to surface those attachments to a non-authenticated user on a web page is another use case. But essentially, it's we'll be open to hearing some of the use cases you guys have around how you might use that. So just to talk a little bit more about APIs, so just to remind everyone that the CXM API documentation is available through the Jadu support portal. So you can go to that link, or you can log into the support portal and go to documentation and CXM API documentation. So we're always looking to improve that documentation. The aim here is to try and raise awareness amongst customers around some of the functionality that's available to you through the API. And some of the other talks today are going to show you how customers have been using the API to build integrations that automate workflows with other systems. So we feel that CXM is more powerful when it's integrated with other systems as part of a user workflow. And some of the things you can do where you can create cases or update them from various different sources, or it could just be retrieving data to analyze it. And we'll come on to look at some examples now. Just another reminder that part of the automation with other systems is also webhooks, which we released in February this year, or added some new webhook triggers earlier this year. So we've added the case create webhook, case transition webhook, and file attachment added. So when those events happen in CXM, you now have the ability to push the data about that case or the file that's been added to any other system that you want. So that's effectively real-time pushing of data, which is an integral part of building out integrations. So just very quickly looking at some example use cases that customers have looked at. So here is the example of reporting. So using the CXM API, you can retrieve case information, which you could store in an external database. And if you wanted to have a real-time element to that, you would use webhooks. So you might use the API to retrieve historic case data, and then use webhooks to push the data in real time, which could give you a If you had a dashboard sitting on top of that database, so some examples would be using Power BI or Google Data Studio, you could add a real-time element to that reporting. So that's one use case using both APIs and webhooks. Another one which Swindon have built a proof of concept for, and other customers have been looking at, is using maps. So around any service that relates to reporting something, you could use the CXM API to create a case from a map, keep the status up to date as well. So when so fly tipping, for example, when that's been collected, you can use a webhook to then update the map so that residents no longer see that pin. As I mentioned, showing images of the fly tipping on that map can now be used. You can now use the relevant APIs for retrieving files. And then another example from what the work Swindon would be doing is classifying images through image recognition services. So pulling it out of CXM and then pushing that classification back into CXM to optimize operations. Just very quickly, just showing some of the automation tools available. The market's becoming a lot more mature. Some of the ones that you're most likely to have come across or have access to would be the Microsoft ones, perhaps. So in the middle, you've got Power Automate, which is the cloud version of Azure Logic Apps. AP is another common one. And in the session at 3 o'clock today, James Cocans is going to be showing you what you can do using Google Apps Script as well. And the idea with all of these tools is that actually non-technical or non-developers can actually build out some of these workflows. And then also just to mention that we're starting to build up resources that show you how to use these automation tools using the API and using webhooks. So keep an eye out in the library for these video tutorials, and expect to see more examples here. And we'd love to then hear back from you in terms of what you're achieving. So the talk at 2 o'clock today is from a customer who's built out integration with Whitespace for waste management from CXM, using APIs to raise worksheets in Whitespace, and also using APIs and webhooks to check if, I think in the context of missed bins, whether a missed bin that's reported is valid or not. And then the session later on at 3 o'clock looks at how expands in detail on how you can interact with CXM from using Google, essentially. So being able to create cases and update them using the API. So that could be via email, it could be from a Google form. Other examples of using the API to raise a case could be from Amazon Lex. So down the line, it could be voice or recognition. And of course, we've also mentioned from a map. So moving on now to another feature. So I believe we've mentioned earlier yesterday around GovNotify integration that's been released recently in CXM. So the ability to send SMS messages and emails from CXM using the GovNotify service. We're now adding into that the ability to send a letter using Notify. So that will actually be released this week. So here's an example of what a garden waste subscription letter could look like. And just to show you how the template in GovNotify would look. So you have configure your template in Notify. And then similar to the other Notify integrations for SMS messages and emails, sending the letter is all rule-based. So you have the flexibility to decide when that letter gets sent in the life cycle of any case. So you have flexibility there, and then the mapping template as well on the right. So you map the placeholders from your Notify template to your fields in CXM. So again, it's a fairly intuitive way of configuring. Just to also mention, it's probably worth looking at the Notify website as well. They've got lots of good information around features, their roadmap, and also pricing. So unlike SMS and emails, where I think you get a certain volume for free, and then it's volume based, this I think is all volume based pricing. So there's not a free option. I think it starts at around 35p per sheet, and it's worth having a look there at some of those options. So I'm just going to pause at this point and open up a quick poll. So this poll is, are you already using the GovNotify integration, or would you like to use it? So you've got until the end of this talk to submit your answer to that. Okay, so moving on to another feature that we'll be releasing hopefully this week, case type management permissions. So you may have seen a blog post come out relating to this in the past few weeks. So this is essentially enabling organizations, yourselves, to control who can build certain case types. So if you have a team or a department that are self-sufficient and have had training in CXM, you may want to outsource the build of that case type to them without giving them access to other case types. So this is the mechanism by which you would do it. So when we released it this week, it's quite simply a new permission on top of the existing permissions. So you can see in the screenshot here that the permission is controlled from the group. So here we have a group called Workflow Editors. We now have a new column which says Administer Case Types, and you'll be required to tick that if you want to have a user who is in that group to have access to that case type, or case types within the service, rather. So just two things to note. So any group who has a user with the Manage Case Type permission enabled will automatically be given permission to all services when we release this feature. So that shouldn't be giving any access to anyone who doesn't already have that access, but that's how the permissions are going to be inherited. And then going forward, when you create a new service, that service will not by default be enabled for anyone. So you'll have to go into the relevant group. So it could be administrators, and then give that group access to the new service. So if we're able to come back to this, if we look at this screenshot again, for example, if the school service has been created, you then have to tick administer for that, for this Workflow Editors group. So I think we're just going to pause again and do another quick poll. So is case type management permissions something you'll find useful in your company? And again, you'll have until the end of this to answer. And as mentioned, there was a blog post that went out recently, so it's worth looking at that for details of the feature. So something we're looking to release, hopefully within the next few weeks, is bulk data retention. So this is something that's been on the roadmap for some time. Talking to some of you, we've decided to bring this forward slightly and deliver a first version of bulk data retention. Some of you have been storing lots of personal details in high volume for COVID related case types. And so we wanted to give you a way to then redact and remove that sensitive data from the system that you no longer need to keep, and do that in bulk rather than per case. So just a quick tour of how this is going to work. So the first thing to note is it's going to be API based. So you'll need to be making a call through the CXM API. And just to go through some of those steps. So the first step that you're going to have to take is to build a filter for the cases that you need redacting. So that gives you complete flexibility over which cases are redacted. So you may want to hold on to the data for certain cases in certain statuses. And then once a case is closed, then it will enter this filter, which will then be ready for you to then redact. Two other things you need to do before you can actually run this request is to create a redacted status and a redact transition. So this will then move the cases that have been redacted to a new status, which you probably call redacted, simply so that you don't rerun the same cases and redact them again, which wouldn't be necessary. And then the next step is to make the request. So this is making a post request to the CXM API. So you can't make this request in the browser. You'd need to use a tool that is capable of making a request. That could be any tool that is capable. For example, we use a tool called Postman, but most of the automation tools that you should have access to can do this. And then the key bit here is that as part of the body of the request, you will be passing through the name of the transition that you want to apply after the cases have been redacted. So in this case, we're passing through the redact transition, and then once all of the cases have been redacted, they will move to the redacted status. Just to clarify what's happening when we are doing the redaction. So we are going to be applying exactly the same action as you currently have available to you manually on a case. So if a user has permission to delete personal data on a case, that's the action that's going to be called through the API. So the first thing to note is that any case fields that are marked as sensitive will all be redacted on the case. All file attachments will be removed, all notes will be removed, and any person records will be unlinked from the case. So you can see here, for this example case, the email field is a sensitive field and it's been deleted, as has the address. And you can therefore keep other non-personal or sensitive data for reporting purposes, should you wish. Just to note, at this point, the bulk redaction just relates to cases. One of the things we have on the roadmap is looking at applying that to users as well. Moving on to another feature that we're working on at the moment. This is an improvement to the case type import process. So this is for a number of reasons, primarily to address an issue that many of you probably come across, where we have we've noticed a memory issue with some customers trying to import case types from a UAT or non-live environment to their live environment, where we've been hitting a few issues with the volume of fields in the environment. So we've been helping you with that. So the improvement we're making here will remove that issue. We're also giving you the ability to specify, when you import this case type into your live environment, the name of the case type, but also the prefix. So that will overcome another issue, where if you've imported a case type into live, but for whatever reason want to import another one with the same name or prefix, at the moment you can't do that, and we've had to help customers do that import. You'll now be able to do this. So this is one of the steps we're taking towards enabling you to work around that problem, but also it would help where you're taking a case type from another customer, from the library, for example, and you want to give the case type a different name and a new prefix. So just to show you a bit of what it will look like. So it's now going to be a multi-step process. So once you've clicked to upload the file, it will then enter a queue. And you can see that the new bin request case type is requiring, it says action required. So you click into view required actions, and that will take you through the import process in multiple stages. So just now looking ahead to the roadmap in terms of what the product team are going to be looking at next. So the next thing on the horizon is single sign-on. So the scope for this is going to be looking at having your staff members, giving them the ability to sign into CXM with their, for example, Active Directory credentials. So they won't need to sign in with the CXM username and password. You'll be able to hook up CXM sign-in to whatever Active Directory service you use, and it'll be using a SAML protocol to do that. So that's something that's going to be coming in the next few months, and we expect to have something delivered before the end of the year. Beyond that, we're looking at the existing theme of making it quicker and easier to go live with workflows. So we're looking at a number of areas here. So some of the ideas we've got primarily would be around making it easier for you to update live case types. So having spoken to lots of you, there are some pain points where you want to make more involved or complex changes to case types that are already live. We want to remove that pain and make that much simpler. So it could be that you've got a subscription service and you want to add in a payment or add in a another action that the user can perform. So making that sort of change is a big change, which requires you to take the form offline, potentially the case type offline, make lots of changes to the forms in CXM and rules. We want to enable you to handle that as seamlessly as possible. Whereas at the moment, it probably takes quite a lot of time and communication with your end users. Other ideas in this space are around handling how case types can be tested and also removed or made offline, for example. Being able to change the service that a case type relates to as well is something that a lot of customers have mentioned. We've found that, well, you've said that setting up your permissions model in terms of what case types customers can see is not too difficult initially, but then changing that can be difficult. And the case type or the service that the case type relates to is fundamental to that as well. We've listened to quite a few of you feeding back around wanting to have more access to audit data in the system. So that relates to being able to have logs around sort of more dangerous actions that users might make around the workflow, the system, and also user administration and other configuration areas. There's quite a lot of logging on a case, but there isn't necessarily a central view of an individual user across all of their activity as well. That's something that you've mentioned, which we'll be looking to tackle. Beyond audit data, we're also listening to some of the demands that you guys have made around wanting to get more access to user data, whether that's citizen my account data or whether it's staff data in terms of group role and type configuration for when you're doing audits of which case types staff members can see. And then finally, APIs and webhooks. So we've mentioned some of the new APIs that are available. And essentially, this is an investment from us in some of the integrations that you guys might be building. So that might mean new endpoints from our side or new webhook triggers. So an example there could be around user webhooks. So there could be an opportunity for you to use user webhooks to send user data for citizen user data into marketing tools to send out communications or even to do analysis on what those users are doing. So there is a webhook at the moment for sending data when a user is created or updated, but we'd also look at when the user is deleted. So you could perhaps do some meaningful reporting on your My Account users. but also passing through some of the information around what those users have done in CXM, so you can analyze perhaps by geographic location what that activity is. Regarding webhooks, there's a roadmap to improve or add richer functionality. So at the moment, webhooks fire for all case types, but being able to specify which case type that should fire for is another thing on the roadmap. And then the next sort of element of this is engaging with you guys. So our customer success team are building up more and more experience in working with these integrations using APIs and webhooks. So we'll be happy to talk to you. From a product perspective, we're really interested in these use cases and what you're doing, and whether there's new endpoints that we could add or existing endpoints that need improving, and what you're doing with them. So one example might be, we've seen some customers doing bulk updating of cases through the API. We'd be really interested in knowing how you're doing that, and also whether that could give us some inclination or could give us some idea of how we could then build that into the product to make it easier. So as we've mentioned, improving the API documentation, but also sharing ideas amongst customers around how you're using those webhooks and APIs. So that brings me to the final point, which is the CXM channel on the Jadu customer Slack channel. So there's been slightly more activity recently, and we'd like to try and channel some of you to it. So we'll be posting release notes there and having general product discussions. But we feel like if you guys can feed back in terms of how you see CXM or how you would like to use the APIs and webhooks, which systems you might want to be integrating with, that would be a really good way of facilitating that conversation. So many of you will probably be members already, in which case you just need to join the CXM channel. And if you're not, then please get in touch with us and we can set you up as users in the system. So you can email me or Kirstine or the marketing team to do that. And I think that brings it to an end. So I think the last thing we'll do is just check the polls. So the first question we asked you was, are you already using the GovNotify integration, or would you like to use it? So 32%, 16 of you said yes, which is quite a high number, which is really good. 14 of you, 28% said no, and 20 of you, so 40% said not sure. So I think that's a fairly common service there that people are interested in using. And then finally, is case type management permission something you'll find useful in your company? So 54% of you said yes, which is very encouraging. So we'll look forward to hearing how you envisage using that and which departments might benefit from that, and supporting you in building out those case types. So thank you very much.
Hey, Tom. So there have been a few questions coming. I recognise we've kind of run over time, but we'll just pick a couple of these to try and answer and then wrap up. So Azra asked about what type of map, Google or other. I think that was probably in relation to our presentation where you showed case updates that were location based.
Yep. I believe at 3 o'clock we'll be touching on that. If we're not, then we can discuss it. But I believe we've proven this with Google Maps. But any mapping technology that supports receiving a web request on firing out a web request would be compatible. So we'll be happy to work with you on that.
And David has asked, is there a cost for the GovUK Notify integration?
Yes. So have a look at the link I sent you, or search for the Notify website and click on have a look on pricing there. So letters are volume based. I think it's 35p per sheet, double-sided sheet, as a starting point. So yeah, unlike emails and SMSs where you get quite a few messages for free, this is all per sheet.
I think David's question is probably actually, is there a cost from Jadu for that integration?
No, you can switch that on yourselves and start using it.
Yeah,
once released.
We've just released to the community because we think that would, as part of our COVID response, we think that that's really useful for you to be able to get updates out to citizens about their cases. So yeah, so that one's covered free of charge from Jadu. It's just the cost for the service from GovUK. Kevin has asked about API access to the timeline and webhooks when timeline is updated. Is that one we've explored, Tom? So when a timeline is updated, having a webhook for that?
Yeah, I can see that being very useful. So Kevin will be in touch and talk to you about that. But I can see it'd be very useful to be able to pull messages as a webhook, push messages as a webhook to another system. So yeah, that's an interesting one, and we'll pick that up with you.
Okay. There's been a question about improvements to reporting you mentioned at the last Academy. You probably just want to talk about the API strategy, the webhook strategy on that.
Yeah, so in terms of reporting on cases, we're advising customers to explore using APIs and webhooks to do that. And that will be touched on in the talk at 3 o'clock today as well. So there's various approaches that you can take, and a number of customers who've been doing that successfully as well. So I also mentioned getting more access to user data as well. So that will be something that follows. So if you're talking about case data, then the APIs and webhooks we believe are already there. So the building blocks for you to then extract the information and use your own reporting tool for that. User data is something we want to give you much easier access to than you have at the moment via the API and webhooks.
Okay. So that wraps up the questions. So thanks for that update, Tom. Hope you all found that useful in terms of both what has released, what's in progress, and up next from the team.